Kayla Osterhoff. She is biocurious_Kayla over on Instagram. For those of you listening, that's Kayla. She is a neuropsychophysiologist, a soon-to-be PhD. So I'll have to call you Dr. Osterhoff the next time you come on the show, Kayla. She's definitely into women's health, and we're going to talk all about so many interesting topics in this realm here today. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to you all about the magic and science of feminine biology.
Yes, and I have a lot of interesting, as a dude, I'm curious about the differences between guys and girls, especially when it comes to brain health and cognitive function and how our brains operate. And so you're the perfect person to talk to this about. But let's get curious about Kayla for a moment. Tell us a little more about who you are. How did you get interested in this aspect of health?
Yeah, well, I've always been really interested in health, and my educational career has been in the health sciences, health ecology in undergrad, and then I got my master's in public health and epidemiology, and then I went and worked at CDC as a health scientist for several years, and I just retired from CDC right when COVID happened. I was actually working on the COVID response briefly before I left CDC. And now I'm full-time research, neuropsychophysiology, and teaching and educating women about their biology. Things that, we should all be taught about as women, but none of us are essentially. And this really just goes back to the gap in health science research that is women, right? Women represent the largest gap in health science research, which is a little bit bonkers, think about, because it's half the population.
There's a lot of egalitarianism when it comes to research circles and in the realm of health. And I'll go outside the realm of brain health. Let's go to cholesterol. So most of the studies looking at like cholesterol lowering medications like statins, they've been done on men, but very scant few have ever been done on women. And I'm like, how many women get put on Lipitor, Crestor, one of these other cholesterol-lowering meds, and they're like, well, there's science that supports it. Well, there's science that supports dudes taking it, maybe for inflammation lowering, but not women at all.
Absolutely. You bring up such an important point. And this really points to what the problem is, which is that women are left out of the clinical research. The research that is done on humans, where all of our wonderful health recommendations and even our biohacks, right, that we're all promoting, all of that research and those outcomes are done on male bodies, mostly, right? And so we cannot take those findings and generalize them for the other half of the population. Although that is exactly what we're doing, and it's a big, big, big problem. What you bring up is one tiny aspect, such a big problem. The same thing is happening with sleeping medications. Same thing is happening with pain medications. There was actually a really, really interesting research paper that came out, I think it was 2 years ago, might have 2019 or 2020, out of UC Berkeley, that really outlined this problem, the gap in women's health science research, and showing that because of the generalizations that are made to women based on research done on male bodies, women are being significantly harmed, injured, and sometimes dying because of these medications.
Well, and let's even go a little deeper than just the gender differences. Look at the race differences. Their minority populations are also significantly underrepresented in so many studies. I read studies. I have this channel called Jimmy Makes Science Simple, and I'm reading from studies, and I'll look at the patient population, and it's like, well, we had 88 white males that are diabetic, and I'm going, how about the female African American with insulin resistant, like how does that apply to her? And it's unknown. You can say, well, you can extrapolate, but as you're saying, there's very clear differences between a male body and a female body. We have to honor those differences by giving them proper representation in these studies.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to give a little explanation on why it is that we have this big gap. And I understand this as a researcher myself. There's a couple of reasons. The first one is that women can become pregnant at any time if they're actively cycling, right? So that makes them risky research subjects, right? The second reason is what I really teach all about, which is the female biorhythm. That's what I call it. Research doesn't necessarily call it this, but this is that women are biochemically and physiologically changing consistently over the course of a month, whereas our male counterparts are consistent. Day in and day out, their biology remains fairly static, right?
That makes sense.
So this really brings us to the difference between men and women, which is their biological rhythm. It's not necessarily that we have different anatomy, right? But our physiology is different because our biological rhythms are different.
Well,
now,
and the endocrine system works differently in a woman because you got certain times of the month that insulin's going to be a little higher because of those changes and that you have to deal with. And like I never thought about it that way, Kayla. Thanks for bringing that to the forefront. That's why I love doing podcasts like this, is you kind of get to think about things. That is a good reason for not including, because the stability of a man not having to deal with all those extra things. But then you could time, I suppose, the research that you're doing for that time of the month that they would be most receptive, and have a control group that would be in the worst time of the month, just to kind of see what the differences would be.
Absolutely. The way that it needs to be done, the most effective way would be to be measuring a woman's hormone levels every day throughout a study to understand what is that impact of estrogen and progesterone throughout the course of the month. And that's actually what I teach about. But that's how we should conduct our research, is that we do need to control for this female hormone cycle, which impacts our physiology at large. And that second part, that is what the scientific, that is what the medical, that is what the educational systems is missing, is that the female physiology at large, meaning her endocrine system, her cardiovascular system, her respiratory system, her nervous system, her brain health and function, her metabolism, her immune system, every single thing is impacted by the ebb and flow of her ovarian hormones over the course of a month. And this creates the female biorhythm, which is not just the female menstrual cycle. That's only one piece of it. That's what drives, right? But that is not what the biorhythm is. It is this month-long physiological cycle that women go through that is systemic.
Let's get into that, since you've kind of coined this phrase of the women's biorhythm. I like that. It's got a nice little ring to it. So kudos for coming up with that. Kind of give us that elevator pitch. What would you say if you had 2 minutes to tell somebody what this is? We'll expand upon it more, but I want to hear like it distilled down into like a nice, convenient package. Go.
All right, and I'll do you better. I'm going to give the explanation of the difference between the male and the female biorhythms.
Okay, good.
So the male biorhythm, the male biological rhythm, is set to the pace of the adrenal hormones. This is our endocrine system and our adrenals, which is, our stress, cortisol, and melatonin, our sleep hormones. So this sleep wake, and not just stress, right? That's our waking hormone as well. Cortisol, we have to have it to be awake. But this is our sleep wake system, right?
Yes.
Now, all humans have this. However, only male biology and physiology follows the pace of this 24-hour system. So every day, day in and day out, the male physiology operates pretty much the same. There are changes over the lifetime, but the changes are very slow. So day to day, it's pretty much the same. Now we look at our female counterparts, and it's a very different story. Yes, we have that sleep-wake cycle, that cortisol melatonin cycle. However, that is not what sets the pace of our biology as women. What sets the pace of our biology are two very different hormones: estrogen and progesterone.
Yes.
Now, estrogen and progesterone ebb and flow throughout 4 different phases over the course of a month. And so because of this, women are essentially biochemically, neurologically, and physiologically 4 different people over the course of a month.
That explains a lot.
Because of this biochemical impact on the physiology. Yeah, that
explains a lot, Kayla. So and it's interesting, and of course it's in our culture, it's kind of laughed about, time of the month and and you change, blah blah blah. But that's interesting. There's
Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Yes, exactly. And so and I've even interviewed from people before that are into women's health And I remember one, Dr. Caitlin Shashowski, she talked about how when you fast, for example, you want to do it according to the moon cycles, that different moon cycles. So is there a correlation with the moon cycles with this biorhythm?
Naturally, absolutely. Now, unnaturally, which is the majority of our modern society, probably not. However, if we took away all the endocrine disruptors, we
Yeah.
took away all the electronics, we took away the EMFs, we took away the crazy schedules, we actually went to sleep, when it got dark, and we woke up when it got light, then absolutely we would all kind of sync up to that cycle as women. Because that is not the case, we're all over the place. And so every woman is so different. That's why women really have to take a bio-individual approach. And to take it a little step further, biohacking is actually more important for women than men, because we have to take this N=1 approach to our health, because we can't rely on the research. We can't rely on those blanket recommendations that are not tailored to us.
And that's a shame. And by the way, thank you for kind of being a champion for this. I don't really hear a lot of people that are being the go get 'em for women's health quite like this. Like, yeah, there's a lot of women's health advocates out there, but this is different. So thank you for bringing something fresh and new to the table. You mentioned earlier about the differences between men and women, and guys were boring. Women, you're interesting, but for way other reasons than we ever imagined. And one of the areas, which is kind of your area of expertise, again, you guys that came in late, this is biocurious_Kayla over on Instagram. And you're a neuropsychophysiologist. That is a mouthful to say. There are very clear cognitive differences between males and females. Can we dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the keynote talks that I give is called The Neuropsychology of Feminine Leadership, and it's based on looking at the differences between the male and female brain when it comes to leadership qualities. And so there's some really interesting differences between the male and female brains. And I'm going to focus primarily on the female brains and kind of these cognitive superpowers that women have. But that is not to say that our male counterparts don't have these same superpowers. They're just more consistent, right? Women have kind of this ebb and flow, so they get access to kind of these extra cognitive abilities throughout the course of a month if they know how to navigate, which is really interesting.
Is that the women's intuition? Would that be the women's intuition that's like common?
That's one of them, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. And, the woman's intuition, scientists are actually finding that that's a real thing now.
Yeah,
we're actually able to see that in brain scans.
All of my best friends in the world are women, and they always have little nuggets, and I'm like, where'd that come from? Like, what?
Yeah, it's our little superpower, and most of us don't even realize that we have it. But really interestingly, if you look at the male and female brain, there's a lot of differences in the way that they function. One of the largest brain scan studies that was ever done looked at over 40,000 male and female brains in the United States, and what they noticed is out of 80 brain areas measured, that the female brain was more active in 70 of them out of 80. Now, that in and of itself doesn't really tell us much, besides maybe women are a little more hypervigilant, which isn't necessarily a good thing, right? However, what it does tell us is that the two brains operate differently. Now, when we go deeper into this and we actually look at the different areas and what's going on, we see that women's brains are much more active in areas where there are high densities of receptors for estrogen and progesterone, right? So the brain is actually modulated by the ebb and flow of these hormones. And that is why we get different cognitive abilities throughout the month. So specifically, these areas are the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. Now, what's interesting about these three areas specifically that are much different than the male brain is that these are areas of the brain that are involved in leadership qualities. So things like decision-making, emotional intelligence, navigational ability, verbal acuity, things like this, communication. these are all areas that are really important in that, including also memory consolidation. So that's why women have this innate ability to be leaders when it comes to their brain function and their cognitive abilities. However, you know, when we look out into modern society, that's not necessarily the story that we see, right?
Oh, I was just thinking, like, of all the major CEOs. I mean, the CEO of YouTube is a woman. I'm trying to think, like, major companies who the CEOs are. I'm sure there's a few that I'm not thinking of. But, like, look, we've never had a female president of the United States. We have a female vice president now, but we've never had a female president. And it's like,
Yeah.
why? If they have all these leadership abilities, I would
Yes.
think there would be, and of course, let's not forget all of those male presidents have had female first ladies that have probably consulted them using those skills that you're describing. So it's not like
Yeah.
the influence hasn't been there, but that's really fascinating. And it is a shame that culturally women are seen as inferior leaders compared to men, when with what you're saying, just biologically, you're wired differently than we are.
Exactly. Now, that's the reason why we don't see as many women in these leadership positions. It's because women are misrepresented and misunderstood and misguided in terms of their health and function and even their physical and mental performance, right? And because of this, because a lack of understanding of the female biorhythm and the ever-changing biological needs that happen throughout the course of a month, women are expected to thrive in environments that are static and consistent. And that, again, we know that that works really well for our male counterparts because that's how they're designed. But for women, it doesn't work that way. So when we're plopped into an environment, an infrastructure, and a support system that is meant for us to be operating consistently every single day and have the same basic needs met every single day, it's setting us up for failure. Now, this goes back to what we see when we look at the burnout rates. Women experience burnout 2 to 3 times more than men. So, and then we look at where the leadership roles are, right? Women only represent 18 to 20% of leadership roles in the United States, and that's including business owners, C-suite, managers, supervisors, all higher level positions. Women are only 18 to 20%. And with that burnout rate, now we're starting to see the big picture. We're starting to see what's happening. We're misunderstood, we're not supported properly, and we don't even know how to operate in partnership with our body because we're not even taught how our body works.
Did you go keto and thought you had to give up wine? Well, let me introduce you to Dry Farm Wines. It is the world's first sugar-free alcohol that is lower than your typical wines, organic, made at local farms that do it the right way. Most of the wines that you buy are from 3 really big companies, loaded with additives and preservatives, so many dozens of those kinds of things. You don't want all that junk in your wine. So go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and they will ship you these wines. And just because you listen to this podcast, Dry Farm Wines is going to give you a bottle in your first order for just 1 cent. Go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and you will get your bottle of wine for just 1 singular penny. Go check them out. Dry Farm Wines, you guys. It's wine o'clock somewhere. Let's go get some wine. Man, and there's a lot of moving parts to this story as well. And internal biases, and like we could go down the list of all the reasons that's going on there. But this is so fascinating. Like, I feel like there needs to be a revolution in who we are as males, who we are as females, like really defining those differences. Of course, our culture is kind of going crazy right now with some of the differences between the ones and kind of convoluting it a bit. But that notwithstanding, there are very physical differences between these two. Now, earlier you made a statement, and we didn't really kind of pick at that scab. We're going to do it now. That biohacking tends to work very well for women. Not that it doesn't give men benefits. I'm the king of ice baths. I'm the king of red light therapy and all the things that I do. But why women and biohacking, and what specific kind of biohacks are they seeing the best results from?
So it's actually not the biohacks that are important for women. It's the biohacking approach, the N=1 approach, the
Yeah.
self experimentation. Because for women, because our cycles are all over the place, right? No woman's cycle is perfectly the same every single month, 28 days aligned with the moon, right? Maybe some women, but that's not the case for the majority of us. And so it can be kind of all over the place. And not only to mention that, but we can't follow the recommendations that are out there and trust them fully if they're done on research that's done on male bodies only, right? So that means that we have to experiment on ourselves.
Yes.
And you also bring up a really good point about ice baths, about, supplements, about red light therapy, about fasting. So I'll just talk about fasting and ice baths, for instance, for women. Now, women have to take special considerations when it comes to their biohacking approach. Their biohacking and their biohacks have to match their physiological signature of each of the 4 phases of their biorhythm.
Yes.
So because, right, they're 4 different people, so they can't do the same biohacking routine every day. They have to have a different one for each of these different signature times within their physiology. So when we take something like fasting, for instance, women, if they fast or even intermittent fast consistently over the course of a month, every single day, that is going to cause damage to their hormones and then damage to their metabolism and damage to their overall health and function. So women cannot take a consistent approach with something like fasting. They have to find the pockets of time within their biorhythm where it is actually safe to do so.
Yes.
There are times when it is safe. For instance, during phase 1, which is the menstrual phase, I call this the shed phase of the biorhythm, because this is when their levels of estrogen and progesterone are at their very lowest level throughout the entire course of the month. Because of that, their metabolism slows down, their caloric need slows down, and there's some significant changes to their physiology at large, which we won't get into all the nuts and bolts. But what's important to know is that if you want to practice some kind of a regular fasting routine as a woman, you have to find the time periods when it is safe for you to do so. The menstrual phase is one of the safe times to do that.
And the week before the menstrual phase, don't go super low carb, keto.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
don't fast that week either.
You got it.
It's so fascinating to kind of learn the differences of the way women need to fast versus men.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you kind of teach yourself about this, it's really fascinating. It opens your eyes that it's not just here's what to do, now do it at some random time. That the timing matters, who you are matters.
Yeah.
Where you are with your stress level matters. There's so many, like I said earlier, moving parts.
Yes. Now, you mentioned stress. This goes back to the cold exposure biohack, right? This is another one that women have to be very careful with. Because of the ebb and flow of estrogen and progesterone, a woman's nervous system is modulated. So much so that, for instance, during the second phase, the follicular phase of her hormone cycle, and I call this the plant phase of her biorhythm, during this second phase, this is marked by a steady increase in estrogen. As estrogen steadily increases, so does your stress capacity. So you get more of a parasympathetic quality to your nervous system and you have a higher stress capacity. So that's a great time to be doing things like cold exposure. Now, towards the end of your luteal phase, the 4th phase, this is what I call the grow phase. During that phase, it's important to understand that your nervous system is getting more of a sympathetic quality to it as you go through that phase. And so your stress capacity, your stress threshold goes down. And so you don't want to be doing things like cold exposure, especially if your stress is not in check regularly.
Yeah, I've been doing a challenge all year long, Kayla. As a biohacker, you're going to love hearing this. So I have the Morosco Forge. And so I've got to 32-degree temperature water every single day since January 1st for 5 minutes a day, every day. and
Wow.
I'm still here,
Ladies
still
listening,
alive.
do not do that.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm saying, that you're giving me things to tell women, hey, look into this more. I will definitely point them in your direction to learn more. But that's really fascinating. By the way, if you ever have aspirations to write a book someday about this kind of four phases, you could
I am,
have a
yes.
title for you, and it's just tentative. The Four Phases of Me would be the title.
Mm.
Like,
I have a couple of working titles, but
ah,
yes, that book is going to be coming out at the end of this year, along with another book I'm writing on feminine leadership.
wow. Well, see, I knew you were already on this. One of your friends is Sean Wells. He probably put the little
Yes.
book bug in your ear, and I've written 10 books. And so you got people around you that have written a few books.
I'll be getting your advice for sure.
Yes, yes. Wow. So, man, I mean, we could go in a million directions. What is something that is a big difference that's not honored well enough between the sexes, between males and females? What is something that people bungle badly?
Hmm. I mean, I would say most things. The biggest thing is that, have you ever heard the term consistency is the key to success?
Yes.
Right? We've all heard that at some point by somebody, if
And I
not
believe,
multiple times. So consistency is actually the killer to success for women. Women require flexibility and they are always changing. They're in constant flux. Whereas men, consistency is the key to success is a real thing. So understanding that women need to operate differently is really the key to raising feminine health and really supporting the women in our world. Another big difference is a neurological difference well, it's really a neurochemical difference in terms of the driver of masculine health or masculine performance, right? Versus feminine health and performance cognitively. So for men, the neurological driver or the master neuroregulator is dopamine. This
yes,
is our reward neurochemical, right? And
yes.
so for men, getting consistent dopamine is pretty like a healthy thing. It helps to regulate your hormones and it has a healthy interaction with testosterone, right?
It's why we eat a lot of bacon. Yes.
Yeah. So, yes, exactly. So, if you look at the way that we operate in our world, just look at, a regular business setting or corporate setting. The way that things are set up is, to check off the to-do list, to have achievements, to do this and that, right? All of these things are kind of little hits of dopamine, 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 dopamine all day long. So, men are successful and happy and thriving, and they're in their consistent day in and day out routine, and it works really well for them. Awesome. And then we look over at our women and we're like, what's wrong with you? Why are you struggling? You should be in a leadership role. You're designed for it. What's going on? Well, it goes back to this neuroregulator. The master neuroregulator for women is not dopamine, it is oxytocin.
Yes.
Okay. So in order for us to have healthy neurological function and healthy this neuroendocrine cascade that impacts our hormones, estrogen and progesterone, we need healthy levels of oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is not the reward chemical. It is the cuddle hormone is what it's gotten the name for.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily accurate, although yes, cuddling can give you oxytocin.
Chocolate does the same thing. Yes.
Right, right. So there are other things that can boost your oxytocin, but really what oxytocin is about connection.
Yes.
Feeling connected. So having working environments that let women feel connected, which is part of their genius zone, is what will promote their cognitive function and balance their hormones, right?
So we need a hugging booth in the
I'm
office.
not saying that.
Obviously consensual hugging, but yes.
Yeah. Maybe a place where you can go and like pet your cats and dogs or something like that.
There you go. That would work.
Yeah. Or just create spaces that actually let women feel connected in their organization, to their community, right? And that's actually part of the genius zone of women. So when we look at the psychological programming of women that actually helps to make them great leaders, one aspect is that women think for the collective. And what I mean by that is passed down through generations and generations and generations of caretakers, right? Women have always taken on a caretaker role in society,
Yeah.
primarily. That has been passed down epigenetically and implanted into the female psyche, which is a subconscious program. It's not even something that we necessarily have control over, is the capacity to think for the collective. So we're always concerned as women about how our actions are going to impact those around us. We're more interested in that than how our actions are going to impact ourselves personally.
Is that a maternal thing? Is that just kind of, I guess, deep in our DNA since the very first woman, that deep within you, that was going to be your role as a woman? Like, is that where it comes from?
I think it's more of an epigenetic thing. So I think it's passed down through cultural positions. So culturally, for so long, women have taken on the caretaker role in society. If
Yes.
that had been flipped, then and men were the primary caretakers of the family unit and the community, then it would be the opposite. Men, I think, would have that same psychological propensity, but that's not the case. So I think it's more of a cultural behavioral thing that's passed down epigenetically.
Now that you're mentioning epigenetics, you got my brain really going crazy. These are fascinating conversations for me, by the way. So thanks for being nerdy with me today, Kayla. But
Sure, nerdy's my middle name.
yes, have that. But you're a beautiful nerdy. So from an epigenetic standpoint, do we see physiological changes in women that have evolved over time as a result of some of these things we've been talking about, where there's adaptations that, because that became the role epigenetically for women, did physical attributes start to happen? Different things pop up, different other new kind of changes start to take place?
My guess would be yes. And unfortunately, because of this research gap, we don't have the hard evidence to say
Right.
yes.
So,
However, I would say yes.
for example, like the human brain has gotten bigger over the
Mhm.
year. And if you look at early primal ancestors, their brains were much smaller, and now we have bigger heads because of the bigger brain, ostensibly from better nutrition and all the
Yeah.
things. So I just wondered if there were any adaptations like that. So to be determined, I suppose, is what you're saying.
To be determined. And I'm finding that there are more and more women in the STEM fields, and more women in medicine and in research. Even being a female researcher, there's not that many out there, and especially a female neuroscientist.
Yes.
There you can find maybe five in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh,
there it's not very common. However, it is gaining interest, and there are more and more women coming together, and we're finding each other, and we're opening up opportunities to increase this capacity of women's health research, right? We've got to get more women researching women, because we get it. We understand why
yeah.
it's needed.
And worst case scenario, show them how to be an N equals one self experimenter to do the thing.
Yes.
I know that's what you want to do with your books and things that you're writing.
Yes, absolutely. That's the first step.
Yeah.
We've got to take an individual approach. And then the next step is getting this kind of education into our primary education systems, but
Yes.
also getting this kind of education and information into public health systems,
Uh-huh.
and into our medical system as well, into the research system. So it's going to be a while, but what we can do now today as women is take this N equals one approach, understand our biorhythm, learn about the 4 different phases and versions of us throughout the course of the month, start tracking to understand where we are and what our status is, and then start running little experiments on ourselves to see what works, what doesn't work in each
Yes.
phase.
I'm going to brag on one of my favorite TV shows of all time. I thought it was hilarious, and they actually featured a female neuroscientist in it. It was The Big Bang Theory. Um,
Oh, yeah.
the character Amy Farrah Fowler, who the girl that played Blossom when I was a kid,
Yeah.
played her in that. I'm blanking on her name right now, but anyway, she was a neuroscientist and was always doing these experiments and testing on monkeys and different things. And
Yeah.
smoking cessation was one of the things. I was a super fan of the show, so I can remember all these things. But uh, Yeah, it was really cool to see that, and I didn't realize there was such a limited number of you guys out there. Maybe that show, and girls watching that going, I want to be a neuroscientist. I don't know what it is, but I want to be that someday. Maybe that'll change some of this perception.
Oh, absolutely. I see more and more female health scientists out there. I see more women interested in these things. And I think as we have these conversations and we show this huge need in this field, and the fact that women are designed for leadership roles, then maybe we'll have women feeling more empowered to step into these roles and take these paths. Whereas, previously, without the proper education, without understanding how their bodies work, without understanding their neurological status and how well positioned they are for research, they may not feel adequate to follow these kinds of career paths.
What is a study that if you had unlimited funds right now, what is a study that you would want to do that would be a well-formulated, obviously randomized controlled clinical trial, double-blind, placebo, all that is the gold standard, so you would probably do that. What would you want to look at?
Well, I would want to get the female biorhythm established into our medical textbooks.
Yes.
Yeah, because, I'm doing some research in the female biorhythm that'll be published over the next couple of years through my doctoral program. However, there's not any research that's out there that's comprehensive. So there's little silos of research. For instance, there's some research on the impact of the menstrual cycle on performance, like sports performance in women, right? Or the impact of the menstrual cycle on cognitive function in one very specific lane, like spatial reasoning, right? So things like that. However, if I had unlimited money, then I would, first of all, pull all of that research together in a meta-analysis to form this idea about the female biorhythm and get support for it, and then run a longitudinal large study that actually follows women through, maybe several years of their cycles to actually show this significant change in their physiology, and also how, when they come into alignment with their body, when they allow their bodies and their basic biological needs to get what is needed in each phase, how that will shift for them and how that will elevate their health and their performance and their mental health even. So that is what I would do if I had unlimited money, and I think it really is needed. However, even before that happens, we really need to update our education system. Our medical textbooks miss the mark completely on women and women's biology. Yeah. The female biological rhythm is not even mentioned. There is, and really it's more of a timing and function issue rather than a straight anatomy and physiology. We understand the anatomy, right? But we're missing the mark on the physiological changes.
Well, it reminds me of the blind spot they have in medical school with nutrition. There's there's no education in nutrition. I've interviewed a ton of MDs over the years, and even nurses, and they're not getting anything about nutrition. And I'm like, how do you ignore the thing that is probably the biggest perpetuator of like hormones getting out of whack, obesity, chronic disease? It starts with that food you're eating. They don't even mention it. And so I'm glad to hear there's another blind spot as well, but the nutrition one has bugged me for years.
Yeah. I was just talking about this with a university actually that I'm hoping to get some of this curriculum put into their programs, their medical school programs. And what's needed really is, yes, we've got to learn basic biology, we've got to learn basic biochemistry, we've got to learn basic anatomy, we've got to learn basic physiology, and then we need a special lesson about women's biology and physiology in terms of the biorhythm and how things are different in terms of timing, right?
A lot of people ask me, Jimmy, how do you get such good deep sleep? Well, there's a lot of things that I do, but one of the newest things that I recently added is this upgraded magnesium from a company called Upgraded Formulas. Go to their website, upgradedformulas.com, and you can learn all about this nano technology that they use for this particular mineral of magnesium. Again, it's called Upgraded Magnesium, and it's got all the different forms of magnesium in it using the nanotechnology so it gets absorbed a lot better. Guys, I have seen my deep sleep improve by as much as 30 to 40% simply by adding in this product along with sunshine exposure, darkness in the room, cooler temperature, all of the things that I always have done. So again, upgradedformulas.com is the website. Go check them out. I can envision you someday, Kayla, having biorhythm like clinics.
Yeah.
Where you have patients come in with whatever, and obviously you're working with, because you would not be an MD, you'd be a PhD, but working with doctors to kind of teach these principles so that then they can say, all right, you're at your second phase of the month. Here's what we need you to, and I feel like a lot of people are just living their lives blindly and eating however and doing things in their life, whatever. And then they hear about some biohack. Oh, I'll try that. And it's the wrong time to do it. It seems to me there's a huge opportunity to take this biorhythm concept and actually kind of make it into something that could make this really big.
Yeah, I'm actually working with a national network of medical spas that are going to be bringing in the biorhythm teachings and methodologies into their clinics in terms of what services the women are going to be offered. So I have something like that in the works. I would love to see it happen, you know, in the overall medical system, so that all doctors, nurses, practitioners are trained in feminine biology properly, so that they can provide the right kinds of treatments and timing of the treatments.
Although I would say with the rise in functional medicine and nutrition-minded non-MD practitioners, I think that's the wave of the future in the medical world. I think we're still going to have allopathic care, always. We should.
Oh, yeah.
If I break my arm, please put it back together. You're really good at that. You don't know how to fix my diabetes, but you know how to fix my arm. So I have a feeling that this would be very well embraced by functional medicine practitioners a lot more readily. Have you noticed that when you've talked around?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, functional medicine practitioners are really interested in this. Now, it makes things definitely more complicated for them, because now it comes into question, what about the timing of the testing, right? That's important, but how often is your functional doc checking the timing of your cycle versus when you're taking your tests? Probably not very often, right?
And I know a bunch of functional medicine doctors. I've never heard them say, well, let's time it for after your period is done within like 3 days. Never. But I wonder if there would be value. And again, it would be a money thing, because that's a lot of money to do that testing, especially the kind of, I'm thinking about Dr. Will Cole. He charges like $1,600 for this whole shebang package of tests, and much more than that for a really big package. Anyway, and if you had to do that at the 4 different phases of your the cycles that you've been talking about, the biorhythm, that would be really expensive. But how cool would that be to see what the differences would be in all 4 phases?
Absolutely. And there would be marked differences in all 4 phases. At the very least, at least find out, you know, where your patient is in their cycle, so that when you get the test results, you can take into consideration, okay, this is the status of their nervous system. This is the status of their cardiovascular system. This is the status of their metabolic system, right? So taking that into consideration is important.
There is your study, Kayla. Get a group of women. It doesn't even have to be a bunch of them. 25, 30, and run those tests at 4 different times. And then you have, and obviously you'd have to get a variety of the ones like we were talking about earlier, make sure ethnicities are different. I'm sitting here building your research for the future, but like that would be really cool. And then you'd see like a baseline, and you'd median them and average them all out. And you'd have to throw out the highest and the lowest and all the different things you do in study. And how cool would that be to then say, hey, all right, we did it with 30. Can we do 300 and see if we replicate these same averages? And then that way you would establish the parameters of what the normal would be in a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 of this biocycle. Wow, like that sounds like an opportunity as well.
Great. If you could get me the funding, I will carry it out today.
That is the bugaboo in all of this. Would the NIH not be interested in that?
They have some grant proposals out there, a couple of which I'm going for. But you know, they're very competitive and
Yeah.
limited in what you can do. I used to manage some grant funding at CDC when I was there, and it's a bureaucratic process, right? And they have all kinds of requirements, and they want the research to be such a way. So potentially that could be an option, but probably I would say it would come from some kind of private funding.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
look, we have a lot of these. It's not GoFundMe, but there's research GoFundMe types of
Yeah.
websites. What would a good study, maybe not the one I just described, but one that you have in your mind, what would a good study cost? 100,000, a million? Like, what
Oh,
are you talking about?
I mean, something like that with 300 participants to get all the lab tests done. You know, you have to hire your statistician and you have to have your lab staff. I mean, probably 500,000 at least.
Yeah.
I would say probably 1 million for something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Gary Taubes always talking about it. They wanted to study like a ketogenic diet in a lab. You easily need a couple $1 million just to start. And then if you
Yeah.
follow them long term and you put them in a metabolic ward, you're talking closer to billions of dollars.
Oh, yeah. If you want to have your own lab and your own medical facility, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a shame that the answers that we want from science can't be had because of logistical things, not really because the ideas aren't there. We all have
Right.
ideas. Just articulated a few to you.
Yeah.
Just came to my mind. I'm sure you have millions more in your head that you think about, and which is going back to this is why you need to self-test and self-experiment, and N equals one
Yes.
self, ladies, and guys too, but especially for you ladies, for all the reasons we've already enumerated. One question I had about the biorhythm, and we're almost wrapping up here,
Yeah.
is when does it start for the women? Is it at birth, as soon as they're born? Is it when the cycle starts? When does it end? Is there like a postmenopausal biorhythm that's
Yeah.
different than the one when they're in their cycle?
Yes, I love this question. Now, the research is limited, so the some of the evidence is going to be anecdotal, right? From what we can glean from what's published and what we know. However, we do know that actively cycling women, so women who have an active hormone cycle, have this monthly biorhythm, and that is pretty well represented in the research. Although it's not necessarily pulled all together for the biorhythm, it's you know, endocrine, it's cardiovascular, it's respiratory, it's all these silos. But when you put it together, the evidence is there that the female biorhythm is active through all of the active cycling years. Now, what's really interesting, and what I have a lot of anecdotal evidence for, and any of the women listening who are postmenopausal can probably attest to this as well, and that is that women postmenopausally, what happens is that the ovarian hormones have passed on the baton to the adrenals, right?
Yeah.
So the ovarian hormones are saying, I'm going to take a back seat, give it over to the adrenals to
Yes.
take the lead from there. However, as women, we don't just then turn into men, right? First of all, we still
Thank
have.
God. Thank God.
That would be scary.
Yeah.
But we still have much higher levels of estrogen and progesterone, right, than our male counterparts. And we also still experience this cyclic rhythm to our biology and our physiology because our physiology has been groomed to operate in this way for most of our lives.
Yes.
And it doesn't just stop when the adrenals take over. It still follows this monthly cyclic rhythm. Now, I would love to see some research studies on this specifically, looking at this monthly cycle that still occurs with women postmenopausally, and proving that women have this biological rhythm that follows them from puberty through the rest of their life.
This is all so fascinating. And as a dude, I find this incredible, and I'm into health, so that helps as well. But I just find this just incredible. And it explains a lot. Like, a lot of people don't want to recognize the clear differences, especially in health, between men and women. And you've just articulated over the last 50 minutes so many reasons why women, you need to be paying attention to your differences. And this is why maybe your husband's able to lose weight and you don't as fast. This is why you deal with certain issues and the guys in your life never deal with those same issues. Like, you're not losing your mind, ladies. Kayla has definitely spelled it all out for you here today. Again, you guys, Kayla Osterhoff, hope you enjoyed her today. BioCurious _, Kayla, again, Kayla is how you spell her name. And wow, I knew this was going to be fun, but this was even more fun than I expected. So thank you, Kayla.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Tired of playing the mask game? Me too. That's why I wanted to tell you about the Unmask. This is a breathable, completely breathable. It covers, you can't even see that it's breathable, but it's breathable. Whether you're going on a plane, having to go into a store and wearing this thing, playthemaskgame.com is how you can get this mask. They come in all kinds of colors and everything. In fact, right there, you can see right through it what it is, but when you're wearing it, it does not look like it's anything different, but it's breathable, baby. Playthemaskgame.com.
Have you experienced the dreaded keto flu? Did you know that most of these symptoms are actually due to your body dumping excess electrolytes? This is where Element comes in. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything you need and nothing you don't. That means lots of salt with no sugar. Element is formulated to help anyone with their electrolyte needs and is perfectly suited to folks following a keto, low-carb, or paleo diet. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium, with none of the junk, no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. Everyone needs electrolytes, especially those on low-carb diets, or if you practice intermittent or extended fasting, if you're physically active, or sweat a lot. Add Element today and see how much better you feel and perform. Use the URL drinklmnt.com/Jimmy.